Somewhere out there, roughly 1 million Bitcoin have sat completely untouched since 2009. Nobody has moved them. Nobody has spent them. They belong almost certainly to Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin itself. And at today's prices, that wallet alone is worth tens of billions of dollars. In March of 2026, a team of researchers, including scientists from Google, published a paper explaining exactly how a future machine could break into that wallet, and roughly 6,900,000 other Bitcoin sitting right alongside it. Read that again. Not steal through hacking, not steal through a stolen password, steal through raw mathematics, math that just got 20 times easier to solve than anyone thought possible a year earlier. To understand why this warning matters, and why it isn't the kind of overblown, doom-laden headline crypto has seen 1,000 times before, you first need to understand exactly what actually protects a Bitcoin wallet. Because it isn't a password in any conventional sense, and it isn't stored on some company's server waiting to be hacked. Every single Bitcoin wallet is secured by a mathematical relationship between two numbers, a private key, which only the owner should ever know, and a public key, which is used to verify that a transaction genuinely came from the person who owns that wallet. The entire system works because of one specific mathematical guarantee. Given someone's public key, it should be computationally impossible using any classical computer that exists or could realistically ever be built to work backward and figure out their private key. This isn't a guess or an assumption. It's a mathematical hard problem called elliptic-curve cryptography. And specifically, Bitcoin relies on a particular version of it called SECP256K1. For the entire history of Bitcoin, going back to its creation in 2009, this specific mathematical wall has held completely uncrackably firm. This is not chaos. This is the entire foundation and asset class worth trillions of dollars has been quietly resting on. The assumption that reversing this specific kind of math is simply permanently beyond reach. Here's where the story takes its sharp, genuinely newsworthy turn. In March of 2026, a paper landed that directly targeted this exact assumption, and the people behind it weren't fringe researchers chasing headlines. It came from Google's own quantum AI division, and crucially, the paper's co-authors included Dan Boneh, a widely respected cryptographer at Stanford University, and Justin Drake, a researcher working directly for the Ethereum Foundation. Think about the significance of that specific lineup for a moment. This wasn't a single company's marketing department trying to generate buzz. This was a collaboration spanning one of the world's leading quantum computing labs, one of the most respected academic cryptographers alive, and a senior figure from inside the world's second largest cryptocurrency ecosystem, all putting their names on the same warning. The paper's specific finding was stark. Using a quantum algorithm called Shor's algorithm, the exact mathematical method theorized decades ago as the eventual key to breaking this kind of encryption, the researchers estimated that Bitcoin's specific elliptic curve, SSCP256K1, could theoretically be broken using fewer than 500,000 physical qubits. Read that number again, and then hold it up against what earlier research had assumed. Just 1 year earlier, most serious estimates placed the qubit requirement for this exact task in the tens of millions, a number so astronomically large it functionally meant not in our lifetime. This new estimate represented roughly a 20-fold reduction in the resources required, a genuinely staggering compression of the timeline achieved not through some flashy new quantum chip, but through purely theoretical mathematical refinement of how efficiently the underlying algorithm could actually be run. The researchers didn't mince words about what this meant. "We urge all vulnerable cryptocurrency communities," they wrote, "to join the migration to post-quantum computing without delay." Before this story goes any further, though, it deserves the same honest, careful scrutiny this channel applies to every dramatic claim, because getting the specific mechanics right here actually matters enormously, and a huge amount of confused, panicked coverage online gets this part wrong. Quantum computers, even a hypothetically perfect one, cannot disrupt Bitcoin mining. They cannot rewrite the blockchain. They cannot forge new Bitcoin out of thin air or corrupt the historical ledger that has recorded every single transaction since 2009. Mining relies on an entirely different kind of cryptographic function called hashing, specifically something called HA256. And this particular mathematical process simply isn't vulnerable to Shor's algorithm the way elliptic curve cryptography is. Think of it like this. Bitcoin's security actually rests on two completely separate mathematical foundations, one protecting the integrity of the blockchain's history, which remains just as secure against quantum computers as it's always been, and a second, entirely different one protecting individual wallet ownership, the specific piece genuinely under threat here. This distinction matters enormously because it means the worst-case scenario isn't Bitcoin itself collapsing or becoming worthless. It's something narrower, and in some ways more personal, specific wallets, under specific conditions, potentially becoming vulnerable to having their contents stolen by whoever gets there first. So which wallets specifically are we actually talking about? And how large is the genuinely exposed pool of money sitting at risk? According to detailed analysis published throughout 2026, roughly 6.9 million Bitcoin, close to 32% of the entire supply that will ever exist, currently sit inside wallets with what security researchers call exposed public keys. Understanding exactly what exposed means here requires understanding a subtle but crucial detail about how Bitcoin actually works. When you receive Bitcoin into a wallet, only a shortened, hashed version of your public key gets published on the blockchain, not the full public key itself. But the moment you actually spend from that wallet, sending Bitcoin out to someone else, your full, complete public key becomes permanently, publicly visible on the blockchain, forever, for anyone in the world to see. Think about what that specific mechanic actually implies. Roughly 1.7 million of those exposed Bitcoin come from Bitcoin's earliest days, before modern address standards existed, to help obscure this exposure. Another 5.2 million come from wallets that simply reused an address, exposing their public key through ordinary spending activity, exactly the kind of habit millions of casual, everyday Bitcoin holders have engaged in without a second thought for over a decade. And here's the detail that should genuinely give you pause, the one mentioned at the very start of this video. Approximately 1 million of those exposed Bitcoin are attributed specifically to Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonymous creator of Bitcoin itself, a fortune that has sat completely untouched since the earliest days of the network, worth an amount of money that would rank among the largest individual holdings of wealth anywhere on Earth. In dollar terms, industry analysis places the total value of this exposed pool at over $700 billion. Now, here's where the second half of this story becomes genuinely urgent, in a way that has almost nothing to do with when a quantum computer powerful enough to actually break this math finally gets built. Security researchers have spent years warning about a specific strategy. Adversaries can already use today, right now, without needing any quantum hardware at all, and understanding exactly how it works reveals why the true clock on this threat may already be ticking, regardless of how many years away the actual quantum computer remains. It's called Harvest now, decrypt later, and in the specific context of cryptocurrency, it takes on a genuinely unsettling form, one considerably more concrete than the same threat applied to ordinary internet encryption. According to detailed technical analysis, blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are, by their very design, fully public, permanently accessible records. Anyone on Earth can download the entire history of every transaction ever made and extract every single exposed public key that has ever appeared on the network, all without hacking anything, without stealing any credentials, all completely, perfectly legally, because the data was never private to begin with. Think about what that specific fact actually means. The harvesting phase of this attack isn't some distant future risk requiring sophisticated intrusion. It's trivial, and according to industry analysis, the storage cost for archiving this entire dataset, even at a massive petabyte scale, runs into the mere thousands of dollars for any well-funded actor. A genuinely negligible barrier to entry for a government, an intelligence agency, or a sufficiently motivated criminal organization. And this isn't purely theoretical speculation about what someone might eventually do. The FBI, the NSA, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency publicly confirmed in 2025 that Harvest now, decrypt later, represents an active, ongoing threat specifically targeting financial infrastructure. Read that again. Not a hypothetical future risk discussed in an academic paper. An active threat confirmed by 3 separate American federal agencies, already underway. Think carefully about what this specific combination of facts actually means for anyone holding Bitcoin in an exposed wallet right now. The public keys protecting those 6.9 million Bitcoin aren't sitting somewhere waiting to eventually be discovered once a quantum computer exists. They're already, right now, completely, permanently public, and almost certainly already sitting inside a database somewhere, patiently archived by whoever recognized this specific opportunity years ago, waiting for the day the mathematics finally catches up to the theft they've already prepared for. This is precisely why the true, effective deadline for this entire threat isn't the day a sufficiently powerful quantum computer actually gets switched on. It's considerably earlier than that, set by exactly how long it takes the crypto industry to migrate away from this vulnerable cryptography, a race that, unlike the underlying quantum hardware itself, is entirely within human control if the industry chooses to move quickly enough. As of 2026, no quantum computer capable of actually executing this specific attack exists anywhere on Earth. IBM currently operates the largest publicly known superconducting quantum processor, holding just over 1,100 qubits, a genuinely impressive engineering achievement, but still separated from the roughly 500,000 qubits. The Google-led research estimates would be needed by a gap of more than 400 times. Neutral atom quantum computers, built by companies including Cura and Atom Computing, have demonstrated experimental arrays approaching similar physical qubit counts, but translating raw, noisy physical qubits into the kind of stable, error-corrected qubits an attack like this would actually require remains, as extensively documented in prior coverage of this exact field, one of quantum computing's single hardest, still largely unsolved engineering challenges. This is the honest, necessary counterweight to everything covered so far in this video. The threat is real, mathematically demonstrated, and endorsed by genuinely credible researchers. It is not imminent in the sense of happening next month, or even necessarily next year. But here's why not imminent doesn't mean safe to ignore. And the expert probability estimates gathered throughout 2026 make that distinction genuinely clear. A survey conducted by GESR Research, polling 26 separate quantum computing experts across the field, published in early April of 2026, produced a range worth sitting with carefully. Respondents estimated the odds of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, a machine genuinely capable of executing this kind of attack, emerging within the next 10 years, somewhere between 28 and 49%, rising to somewhere between 51 and 70% within 15 years. Read those numbers again. Not a near certainty. Not a fringe possibility either. A genuine coin flip, or close to it, within a time frame considerably shorter than most casual crypto holders probably assume when they think about this specific risk at all. IBM's own chairman and chief executive, Arvind Krishna, offered his own timeline in a recent interview, stating plainly that he expects quantum computing to have a measurable, meaningful impact on his own company's business by 2028 or 2029, a specific, dated prediction from someone whose entire company is racing to build exactly this kind of hardware. Faced with all of this, how has the crypto industry actually responded? And here's where the story reveals a genuinely fascinating, structurally important contrast between the two largest cryptocurrencies on Earth, one that says as much about governance and culture as it does about pure technology. Bitcoin's response has been real, but genuinely, honestly, slower and messier than many would prefer. Developers have formally proposed something called BIP 360, a specific technical upgrade designed to introduce quantum-resistant address formats directly into Bitcoin's protocol, and as of mid-2026, that proposal has actually been merged into Bitcoin's underlying code base, a genuine, concrete step forward. But merging a proposal into the code isn't the same thing as completing a full network-wide migration. And Bitcoin faces a genuinely difficult structural challenge here that has nothing to do with the underlying cryptography itself. Bitcoin has no central authority, no single company or foundation capable of simply mandating that every wallet, every exchange, every piece of infrastructure upgrade on a fixed timeline. Its entire culture is built around decentralization and resistance to exactly that kind of centralized coordination. And while that design has been one of Bitcoin's greatest philosophical strengths for over a decade, it becomes a genuine liability when the network needs to move quickly and cohesively against a shared external threat. Industry estimates suggest a full, meaningful migration could take somewhere between 5 and 7 years to genuinely complete across the entire network, assuming the community can even reach sufficient consensus on the specific technical approach to begin with. Ethereum's story looks meaningfully different, and understanding why offers a genuinely useful lesson in how different governance structures respond to identical technical threats. Ethereum maintains what industry analysts describe as a coordinated, well-funded post-quantum migration plan, backed directly by the Ethereum Foundation itself, the same organization whose own researcher, Justin Drake, co-authored Google's original warning paper in the first place. Think about what that specific detail reveals. Ethereum's leadership wasn't simply reading about this threat secondhand and reacting after the fact. They were directly, actively involved in producing the original research, identifying it, giving the ecosystem a genuine head start on formulating a coordinated response. And there's a specific technical nuance worth understanding here too, one that offers Ethereum a partial, though not absolute, additional layer of protection. Google's research specifically modeled a hypothetical attack scenario requiring roughly 9 minutes to actually execute, the window of time between a transaction being broadcast across the network and being permanently confirmed. Ethereum's blocks confirm in roughly 12 to 15 seconds, a window so short it leaves almost no practical opportunity for that specific 9-minute attack scenario to actually succeed in the real world, even once the underlying hardware theoretically exists. But before this starts sounding like Ethereum has simply solved the problem while Bitcoin lags helplessly behind, it's worth being genuinely honest about the trade-off involved. Ethereum's underlying account structure exposes public keys by default, as a fundamental part of how the network operates, creating its own distinct category of exposure that Bitcoin, with its more varied address types, doesn't share in quite the same way. Neither network has actually solved this problem completely. They've simply arrived at two genuinely different points along the same difficult road, each carrying its own specific trade-offs. It's worth pausing here to include a genuinely important voice of caution, because responsible coverage of this topic means resisting the temptation to simply escalate the fear with each new detail. Dan Bonnet, the same Stanford cryptographer who co-authored the original warning paper sounding this entire alarm, offered a notably measured, careful perspective in a subsequent interview in May of 2026. Rushing headlong into a hasty, poorly coordinated post-quantum migration, he warned, could actually create bigger, more immediate dangers than the underlying quantum threat itself currently poses. Think about why that specific warning deserves genuine weight here, coming as it does from the exact person who helped sound the original alarm in the first place. A rushed, poorly tested migration to new cryptographic standards, implemented under panic rather than careful engineering discipline, could introduce entirely new vulnerabilities, bugs, and attack surfaces of its own, potentially creating fresh, immediate security holes in the race to patch a threat that, by every credible expert estimate gathered here, remains years away from actually materializing. This is precisely the kind of nuanced, occasionally counterintuitive honesty that separates responsible reporting on this subject from pure, escalating panic content. So, what does all of this actually mean for an ordinary person holding Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency right now, watching this video, wondering whether they should genuinely be worried? The honest, carefully researched answer sits precisely between the two extremes this topic tends to attract online. This is not a reason to panic, sell your holdings, or assume your funds are about to vanish overnight. No quantum computer capable of executing this specific attack currently exists, and every credible expert estimate places a meaningful, dangerous probability of one existing somewhere between roughly a decade and 15 years out, not next week, not next month. But it is also genuinely not a reason to dismiss this threat entirely, or to assume you have unlimited time to think about it later. The specific, practical steps available to reduce your own personal exposure are genuinely simple and available to you right now, today, regardless of how far away the actual hardware threat ultimately turns out to be. Avoiding address reuse, ensuring you generate a fresh, unused address for every single transaction, rather than repeatedly spending from the same wallet, keeps your public key hidden from public exposure until the exact moment you actually choose to spend, dramatically narrowing your own personal window of vulnerability. Moving significant, long-term holdings out of old, already exposed addresses and into fresher, currently unexposed ones removes those specific funds from the pool of coins already sitting inside whatever databases adversaries may already be quietly compiling. Zoom out from any single wallet or any single piece of guidance and consider what this entire story actually reveals about the broader moment quantum computing currently occupies in the world, a theme running consistently across every piece of research explored throughout this channel's coverage of this field. Quantum computing isn't some distant science fiction curiosity anymore, safely confined to physics laboratories and academic journals nobody outside the field ever reads. It's becoming a genuine, quantifiable, expert-estimated risk factor, one serious enough that Google's own researchers, working alongside Stanford's most respected cryptographers and the Ethereum Foundation's own senior technical staff, felt compelled to put their names on a formal public warning, specifically naming the exact mathematical vulnerability protecting hundreds of billions of dollars in cryptocurrency. That warning arrived not as vague, hand-wavy speculation about some distant future, but as a precise 20-fold reduction in a specific, measurable number, the qubit count required to actually execute this exact attack, a genuine, documented shift in how close this threat has moved within the span of a single year. The clock on this specific threat is, by every credible measure gathered here, still running slowly enough that panic serves nobody, and rushing serves nobody either, exactly as Dan Boney himself was careful to point out. But it is running, measurably, documented, faster than it was even 12 months ago, and the specific coins most exposed to it, including, almost certainly, the very first Bitcoin ever created, sit publicly, permanently visible on a blockchain anyone in the world can freely examine right now, this very moment, while the mathematics slowly, steadily continues catching up to them. If you want to understand exactly what happens once Bitcoin's own quantum-resistant migration finally reaches meaningful, network-wide adoption, and whether the industry manages to complete that transition before the hardware timeline experts have been carefully tracking throughout this entire video finally catches up, that's precisely the story we'll be following closely as it continues to unfold. So make sure you're subscribed before that next chapter finally arrives. Before you go, I want to know what you honestly think about everything you've just heard. Does the genuine 20-fold reduction in the resources needed to break Bitcoin's cryptography convince you this threat deserves serious, immediate attention from anyone holding cryptocurrency right now? Or does the continued, substantial gap between today's largest quantum computers and the hardware actually required tell you this remains, for the moment, a distant problem with plenty of time left to solve it properly? Leave your honest answer down in the comments below, and as always, I read every single one.